The second factor I would like to mention, which is working against this consensus factor and cooperation between international institutions, is what I would call integration fatigue. And if I mention integration fatigue, I mean integration fatigue right here in Europe. It is not new, nor is it as serious as some Eurosceptics want to make us to believe. However, it does prevent, in my opinion, the European Union from becoming the unified economic and foreign policy actor that it wants to be, and in my opinion, should be. If I go to the other side of the Atlantic, I don't detect any fatigue in the aspiration by the United States to provide global leadership. But as the era of the Bush presidency draws to a close, and with our major financial crisis shattering confidence, there's growing debate about how the United States should position itself in a more complex world with a range of new players. This is, of course, the unipolarity, multipolarity discussion. Now, the third challenge, and I think, Thierry, you mentioned it this morning as well, to our collective ability is the ever more complex interrelationship between the different national interests. Of course, nations have had and still have conflicting national interests. But never before have our nations and have our national politicians, and I was one once, have been asked to satisfy so many demands of their people. So in a world marked by an increased competition for natural resources, as well as these many new threats and challenges, nations need to satisfy their citizens' demands for physical security, but they're also asked to provide for job security, energy security, food security, and many other elements and aspects. And to satisfy these demands, governments might be tempted to adopt an inward-looking, selfish, perhaps even nationalist stance. You see that happening as we speak. And this would push us even further away from notions of what I would qualify as enlightened global governance. The risk is real. Over the past few weeks, the UN Security Council failed to agree on a joint position on the conflict in Georgia, failed to agree on another round of sanctions for Iran, failed to agree of condemning Zimbabwe, as Prime Minister Odinga already mentioned. I tell you no news if I'm telling you that the OSCE is going through very rough times, and given their more limited and like-minded membership, NATO and the European Union are perhaps not quite as vulnerable to disagreement as the UN, yet I consider this hardly a consolation. After all, NATO and the EU, as I said, draw their legitimacy more and more from the United Nations. So if that system is strained, because the key players follow different rules, it will have a negative effect on all institutions. What is my conclusion? 3 brief points. First, I believe that it is even more important to push for closer, pragmatic cooperation among our key institutions. NATO and the UN signed this declaration I mentioned, and I hope it will set the scene for further progress. For example, in building closer relationships between NATO and the African Union, the Arab League and key non-governmental organizations. Is this out of the NATO area? No, it's not. We have to learn in Afghanistan what it means to be in the same theater with non-governmental organizations, quite new to NATO. We realize in Afghanistan that NATO all by itself cannot make the difference. We learn in Afghanistan that this is not a question of military victory, but that it's about a regional approach with Pakistan and other important players, with the European Union, with the G8, with the UN. And that is also new to NATO, and I can tell you it is a different and from time to time hard process of adaptation and reform. Second, we must realize that many rules and institutions were created well before today's new situation, with the appearance of new heavyweights on the international political scene. And some of them challenge the rules precisely for that region. They tell us your institutions dating back to the last century. We are now on the world scene as well. We are heavyweights. We have power. Why should your institutions and your rules and regulations be as valid in the 21st as they were in the 20th century? And as far as NATO is concerned, I believe that in this regard we should go on in strengthening our partnerships. I have mentioned a few. Third and finally, in light of the many problems this world is facing, I believe that the true yardstick of power will be the power to co-opt. How to rally others, notably the rising powers behind the common agenda, will be the crucial question in the years to come. Because with shrinking financial and military resources and rising domestic demands, nations can only pursue a sensible outward-looking agenda, and I think that is absolutely necessary if they act in concert and share the burdens. Clearly, this common agenda can no longer be a purely Western agenda. Still, one would hope that certain unique achievements in the West could serve as an inspiration in this regard. The sense of being part of a broader community and the importance of institutions for turning common views into common action. And if I say broader community, and there I'll finish, Jim Hoagland, one word in closing, and that's about a remark made this morning by Thierry de Montbrial. How big families will be it European Union or NATO, will finally, of course, be decided by those institutions. And you know that the Washington Treaty is about European democracies. So I have some difficulty with the question, should this enlargement process of NATO stop? Why should it stop here and not there if nations who aspire NATO membership fulfill the criteria? A complex and difficult debate where many interests are at stake, but I would resist the principle that because interests might not always coincide, an enlargement problem of these wonderful institutions should stop. I've spoken too long, Jim Hoagland. Thank you so much.